Okaeri Alice, or Welcome Back Alice, is a manga by Oshimi Shujo, and I've been obsessed with it for about a year now. Ever since I read chapter 9, I've been hooked, and as of chapter 21, I'm still really invested to see how things turn out. For those that don't know, Okaeri Alice is a story about three childhood friends, Kei, Mitani, and Yo, reuniting in high school and struggling to understand and be happy with themselves and each other in their adolescence, which is made even more difficult thanks to the social pressures that come with it, be it gender roles or general social norms, and each of our characters tackle these things in their own ways. Kei tries rejecting it all outright to be themselves, Mitani is firmly planted in these social constructs to see any differently, and Yo, our protagonist, gradually breaks away from them as the story goes on. Their differing approaches and desires, however, end up causing a lot of conflict and drama between them. The story is still ongoing, so we'll see how things turn out, but that's the basic gist of it so far. I'd highly recommend checking it out before watching this video. There's only 21 chapters right now, it's an easy, fluid read, the story is really well told, and for some, it can hit pretty hard sometimes. It certainly did for me. It might not be for everyone, I know there are some that find it a bit uncomfortable to go through, but if any of this piques your interest, then I really recommend giving it a shot. With all that said, let's finally go ahead and talk about it. The thing I love most about Okaeri Alice, if you couldn't tell already, are its characters. Kei, Mitani, and Yo are all really engaging in their own right and have some interesting dynamics with one another. What makes them really great, however, is how the narrative handles them. Initially, they all seem a bit basic, but as the story goes on, the layers of each character gradually unravel, and as they do, they impact the others in some pretty meaningful ways. This is true for everyone in our trio, so I'll just start by going over my favorite, Kei. Starting off, Kei appears as an insensitive, mischievous schemer. They tease Yo a bunch sexually, bring both him and Mitani to their house only to make her uncomfortable, and is framed as though they're always in control. It just seems like they're causing trouble for their own amusement. When we reach chapter 9, however, a shift begins to occur. Yo questions Kei about their actions and asks if they're just doing all of this to mess with him. To which, Kei speaks from their heart and essentially assures Yo that they're not doing this to mock him. They ask Yo to help them because they feel lost and even call him their other half. Finally, when Kei makes him come, they don't tease or ridicule him for it, but are instead legitimately happy. It's an incredibly sincere response that we really wouldn't have expected from Kei. Their character will still carry an air of secrecy, but as the story goes on, their previous actions and intentions start becoming clear. All Kei wants is for Yo to be honest and happy with who he is. That's all it really boils down to. And to get him there, Kei began by trying to rid Yo of his imprisoning perception of his own manhood. They were pretty forceful about it at first, but eventually eased up and became a lot more considerate, which eventually speaks to Yo, with chapters 18 and 19 being the point where Yo finally understands this, and takes his first steps into accepting what he really feels. It would also mark the point where he finally, truly lets Kei in. Since Yo was pretty standoffish to Kei until now, we haven't really gotten much of their perspective or personal struggle yet, but I'm sure we'll understand them more as the story continues. While Kei is my favorite, Mitani is definitely the one that interests me the most. Mitani begins the story as a nice, cute girl that Yo desperately wants to be with. She's a typical love interest, and that's probably the direction her character would have stayed in if not for Kei. You see, Mitani develops a pretty big inferiority complex about her own womanhood thanks to Kei. Their indirect rejection of her in chapter 1 is probably where it all stems from, but it's not until Kei's passionate kiss to Yo where her frustrations really begin. From that point on, Mitani begins comparing herself to Kei as a woman and treats Yo as an arbiter of sorts. In chapters 6 and 7, she asks Yo what he thinks of Kei, how he felt about their kiss, and ultimately who he prefers. While she does pester him here, she is mindful about his feelings and eases up. She even seems to develop some genuine feelings for Yo afterwards. As she sees how close the two were and fails to understand Kei, however, Mitani's insecurities start taking over and become more toxic. She dates Yo under the condition that he never speaks with Kei again. Whenever they talk, she ends up disregarding his feelings, and at times it really does seem like she's actively trying to make him feel bad. Despite how it appears, though, she isn't dating Yo completely out of spite. I'm sure she still cares about Yo and wants to have a genuine relationship with him, but she's just too driven by her own insecurities to actually do that and move forward. I know this is going outside of the first 20 chapters, but going off of the ending of chapter 21, I'm pretty sure this insecurity is the real reason she didn't want to kiss Yo in chapter 13. She was just afraid of not matching up to Kei's kiss. Her insecurity and frustration only grows even more though when she finds out that Kei kissed Yo later that night, and learns of their little practice session in chapter 9, leading her to try to go all the way with Yo, and when that fails, she's left completely devastated and finally lets all of her emotions out. It's honestly really sad to watch. She's probably going to fall deeper into the rabbit hole as the story continues, but I really hope she doesn't end up doing something completely heinous as a result. Given how this is an Oshimi Shujo work, though, well, we'll just have to wait and see. I'm really hoping Yo will somehow end up helping her like Kei suggested. Something you'll have probably noticed as I went over Kei and Mitani is that their characters kind of shifted with one another. Kei seemed like they'd be a pretty devious character starting off, but turned out to be a lot more considerate and kind-hearted than they initially appeared. Meanwhile, Mitani went from a good-natured girl to a pretty domineering and toxic character. This is pretty cool development on its own, but what makes it land so well is how much the narrative kept enforcing their initial roles at the start, only to completely subvert our expectations and then proceed to capitalize on it. It really felt as though Kei was just toying with Yo at the beginning, so to see them give such a warm and genuine smile to him in Chapter 9 was a really striking turning point for the character, and leads really well into some of the more wholesome and intimate moments they'll share afterwards. On the flip side, seeing sweet, mild-mannered Mitani give such a spiteful and cold smile in Chapter 10 was pretty chilling, and gives us a good glimpse into how controlling and deceptive she can really be, which we see a great deal of when she dates Yo. Seeing these two contrasting developments play out at the same time really heightened them as well. It's honestly just really good storytelling. Yo is the last in our trio, and while he's not as engaging as these two, I still really like what's been done with him so far. For these first 20 chapters, Yo is mostly bobbed around by these two, but that's because he's still breaking out of his shell and finding himself. Like Mitani, Yo is heavily influenced and driven by his gender role. When Kei returns, however, his desires begin to clash with these views and he becomes conflicted, which is wonderfully represented by his contrasting relationships with Kei and Mitani. While he kinda goes back and forth on this, by chapter 11 he does choose Mitani over Kei and is pretty content with it at first. As they went out, however, his unfulfilled desires along with all these expectations of how he should be, as the man in the relationship, made him anxious, and not being able to live up to them later on just made him feel terrible. Mitani's own insecurities didn't really help either, which is why Yo consistently kept going back to Kei. They made him feel happy and free to be himself, leading Yo to accept them and find comfort in a time when these social constructs didn't control him like they do now. The way these relationships drive Yo to reach this point is really the highlight of his character in these first 20 chapters. I'm sure I'll have a lot more to say about Yo as his journey continues, but for now I've just really enjoyed it so far and am interested to see where he'll go from here. That's pretty much all I have to say for now. I don't really like covering stuff that's ongoing because I like having the full picture, but I just really wanted to talk about Okaeri for a long time now, and Chapter 20 seemed like a good time to go over it, since it basically summarizes Yo's development up to this point. My interpretations and thoughts on some of the characters may end up being wrong in the long run as a result, but we'll see. By the way, if you're curious about my thoughts on Ren, I'm sorry to say I don't really have much yet since they just recently showed up and we don't really know what they'll contribute to the overall narrative yet. I've enjoyed them so far though. So yeah, that's basically it. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video and thanks for watching. I know this is completely different from the stuff I usually talk about, but this has been on my mind for a while and I just really needed to get it off my system. I've really been enjoying this, you guys. Again, thank you. Take care.